Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking all about cardio. So if you're somebody who's been around for a while, you know that I'm all about muscle equals metabolism. But you may have asked, where does cardio fit into that? So today I am sharing a class replay from my app membership where I dove into the most frequently asked questions about cardio. How much can I do? How much should I do? Where does it fit in? What if I love cardio and don't want to give it up? Like, how does that fit into this whole spectrum of wanting to rebuild lost muscle mass? And how does it affect my metabolism? So if you're someone who has had those questions, then I think today's video is going to be super helpful for you because you are about to see that there are some very wild ends of the spectrum where either people are doing tons and tons of cardio because they think that's what they have to do in order to get results, or you have people that are like very sedentary, hardly doing any movement outside of their 2 to 3 lifting workouts per week because they feel like I shouldn't do any cardio. And the problem is that typically neither one of those are getting results. The people who are doing way too much maybe ended up gaining weight overall, as well as the people who are doing too little might find that they're gaining some weight from being super sedentary. So hopefully you don't fall under any of those extremes, but whether you love cardio, hate cardio, or just flat out wondering how does this work for you, go ahead and stay tuned for today's class because it is going to give you so much insight into how to make cardio work for you and your goals.
Let's talk cardio. The reason why I want to talk about it is because a lot of times once we hear that one thing is good, the diet mentality automatically wants us to think that the opposite of it is bad. So if we're talking about like, love your body, then that means that anything that you're not doing that's, changing your body means that you don't love it. Or if we're saying lift weights, then that means you should never do cardio or yoga or anything else. Or if we're saying like, it's okay, you can eat all types of food, then that means like, don't ever eat healthy, like only eat junk food or something like that. So it's like the diet industry wants us to always pick like sides of the fence and be really extreme. And I don't get into that. I feel like it's okay to have your goals, but also include things that you love, as long as you understand that sometimes the things that you love aren't necessarily things that's going to help you reach your goals, but you can still kind of include those, just because you like them. Like Jessica, I see you here, and I know you said, earlier, like you love to run, and that was something that you kind of set to the side for a while because of your goals, and now you're trying to figure out how to get it back in. So I want to talk about just like different types of cardio, amounts that you should do, not should, because again, there's not like a clear-cut amounts that you can do, and how to fit them in for your goals. So I just wanted to get that out of the way first and foremost, that it's not about being extreme. Like doing some cardio regularly is not the end of the world. You're not going to catch me doing a ton of it, but that's okay just because that's not my preference. So first and foremost, when you're trying to figure out, for you, cardio is to always, and this is with any type of workout or diet plan or whatever, and you're probably going to get sick of me saying this like every time we talk, but be clear first on what the goal is in order for you to decide how much of anything that you should be doing or not doing. Like, what is your goal? So, like cardio is going to get your heart rate up, and have you breathing heavy. Pretty much that's essentially what cardio is all about. It's getting your heart rate up, you're breathing pretty heavy, that's all it is. Now, how that plays into it is going to decide, first of all, it's going to be based on what your goal is. And then second of all, it's going to be based on the type. So when we're talking about the types of cardio, it could be walking, like leisure walking, power walking, cardio machines, or like steady state type stuff. We could be talking about HIIT, high intensity interval training, whether that's with machines or running on the track, whatever. We could be talking about MRT, which is metabolic resistance training, which is like cardio with weights. So a lot of times you'll hear me say, like if someone is lifting like in a very high rep range lifting exercise, like maybe boot camps or body pump, some types of CrossFit workouts, things like that. Like a lot of times those are more of a metabolic resistance training, which is basically when you're using weights for cardio. So that includes using like kettlebells, lifting weights faster, body pump, boot camps, all those things. So, they're not, the first thing to lay out there is that when you're looking at the types of cardio, they're not all doing the same thing. So you can't just decide on one method for all of your cardio uses. So that's why I went over, just some of the types first, because there's always different types. But you're not necessarily saying like, okay, I'm just going to do that type of cardio and it's going to suffice for whatever my goal is. So that's the reason why we first started out with, okay, what's your goal? And then we look at the different types and we realize that not all of them are going to achieve the same thing as far as it pertains to your goal. Again, whether or not you're using it as part of your goal or not, we're going to get to that. But these are just kind of the steps that you want to take as far as putting it all together. So once you understand that there are multiple types and that they don't all accomplish the same thing, you want to start like kind of breaking down, okay, then what do they do? So like when we talk about like walking, walking is, especially not, if we're not talking about power walking, we're just talking about like leisure, like go like walk your dog or go out for like a walk after dinner with your husband or something like that. Walking is the only cardio that is going to actually lower your stress levels. All of the other types of cardio are going to raise your cortisol and your adrenaline in the short term, which if you followed some of the things that we talked about before, when your cortisol levels are spiked for a long time and they stay up there, that's actually worse for your physique. But when they're just spiked temporarily and comes back down, that's actually a good thing. So there's two different types of stress, but it's important to understand that all exercise is stress. And when we're talking about cardio, most cardio, other than walking, is going to increase your stress levels. Leisure walking actually lowers them, which is why you will always hear me say that walking is like the secret belly fat weapon that most ladies don't know about, especially when we start getting more intense with our workouts. We think that walking doesn't really do anything anymore, or when we do walk, we're trying to hit that cardio zone, so we're like power walking and trying to like sweat hard and breathe heavy, right? So that doesn't mean that all of the other cardio exercises are bad though. So most of the time I lean the direction of walking when people are talking about what they want, because when they say their goals and they kind of lay out all the other stresses in their life, I'm like, okay, well maybe you should walk, because walking is the only thing that's going to lower your stress levels. But that doesn't mean that all the other types of cardio are all bad. It just means that you have to understand that the higher the intensity and the longer the duration, the more cortisol and adrenaline is going to be released. So when you start looking at the different types of cardio that you would like to do, and you're looking at your goals and you're saying, okay, not every type of cardio serves every type of purpose, but I still want to do some cardio, then those are the things that you want to consider. Understanding that the higher the intensity that you go, the longer the duration, the more cortisol that you're going to be released. The cortisol, adrenaline, lactic acid, HGH, testosterone, like combo, those are all fat burning hormones in the short term. So if you guys were a part of the mini workshop that we did probably earlier this year, I think it was maybe in January, or if you've seen some of the webinars where I talked about the muscle-based mindset and fat loss, we talk a lot about those hormones. Now, this isn't going to turn into a science lesson, but it's just good to know that those types of hormones that are released during certain workouts and exercises are fat burning in the short term. So again, we're talking about those like spikes in the cortisol. So when you're having it go up for a short period of time and back down, that's fat burning. When it goes up, stays up, that's going to actually start leading into some fat storage. So that's where you start hearing the other side of the equation when people are like, oh, all cardio is bad. Well, that's usually what's going to start making it bad. So when it's longer in duration, that's where your problems are going to come in. Doing too much of that long-term, like steady state type cardio that doesn't ever break into that anaerobic threshold, meaning like that, like high-low. Anaerobic is more of what you get when you're doing weights and HIIT type workouts versus just clearly aerobic. If you're staying in that aerobic zone, that's what can lead to some of the muscle loss that you may hear talked about from people who love lifting and don't do a ton of cardio. So that's when you hear the too much cardio debate, is from doing high levels for long terms of more of the steady state cardio. Shorter durations of high intensity cardio can actually be really good for fat loss. So if you're trying to incorporate, you love cardio and you're trying to incorporate it for fat loss, like maybe that's your goal, then that's something that could help. Shorter duration, higher intensity. That's going to tend to be the best for fat loss for most people that are using cardio out of the cardios. So remember what I'm saying is we're talking about the cardios, we're comparing the cardios. Now, that being said, it's also good to know that that doesn't necessarily mean it is true for everyone. That doesn't mean that traditional or longer duration cardio is useless. I know a lot of people love, running marathons and stuff. And sometimes when you're training for those, especially once you get beyond 5, 10K, like you're having to put in some longer runs. When that happens, again, not the end of the world. Just understand how it is playing into your goals. That's the bottom line of everything that we're discussing here, is understanding how it plays into your goals. Not doing one thing and expecting the results of another. That doesn't mean you can't still do the thing. It just means do it for what it's for. If you're doing the longer runs to prepare for an event, then you gotta do the longer runs. And guess what? It's gonna help you prepare for the event because it's gonna do what it was intended to do. So that's why it's really, really, really important. So make sure that you understand that difference between the acute versus chronic effects. Acute means short, like just happening really quick. Chronic means like happening nonstop, always stressing out. So that means that now, if you're looking at your lifestyle, you're looking at, okay, these are my goals. This is the type of cardio that I like to do or that I'm considering. Now you want to take your lifestyle into consideration, because this means that a person who is under tons of stress may create an adaptive response that teaches your body, how to respond better to stress. So that acute short-term effect might not hurt, but a person who's, so like somebody who's only doing it now and then, it may not hurt you to have those higher levels, those longer runs, those 90-minute DVD sessions, whatever, if you're not under a lot of stress. If you're overly stressed in life, then doing lots of long, intense workouts on top of it is actually going to create that environment that is not preferred for fat loss. If fat loss isn't your goal, then maybe that you don't care about that. But that's why your goals have to come into consideration first. If you're not concerned about fat loss, then a lot of the stuff won't matter. If you are concerned about fat loss and or muscle building, then it's very important to understand that your lifestyle does come into play. We like to just set it to the side and think like, oh, it's no big deal. I'm a little bit stressed, but it's no biggie. I'm just going to go for this run to, for therapy. I'm going to, go do this class because it relieves my stress. Maybe. And even though it's releasing endorphins, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's relieving your stress if you are under a lot of stress. It is actually adding to the stress. So that's something that, those are some of the key things to take in consideration when you're figuring out the types of cardio workouts that you want to do. A lot of people want to, know like, okay, so can you train for a marathon and lose fat? Because some people do. They pick a race as a way to help them lose fat. And can you train for a marathon and lose fat? I mean, technically, yes, but it would have to be done in a way that's contrary to what you think. So you wouldn't like cut your calories and then train for a marathon. You wouldn't do like the whole like exercise more, eat less thing. You would have to actually increase your calories as you increase the amount of exercise that you were doing. But you would also have to understand that the hormonal balance might be thrown off if you're trying, to like diet and cut while you're training for a marathon. Those don't go hand in hand. So you shouldn't train for a marathon to lose fat. If you're training for a marathon, that should be your focus, is training for the race. That means that you should be eating enough to fuel your body for the race. That means that you should not be trying to like cut down your calories or anything. You shouldn't be worried about like weighing in and all that stuff, because that's not what you're doing. You're trying to actually train for your race. So that's what you should be doing, is training for the race. So some dieters who train for a marathon, actually many dieters who train for a marathon, like while dieting, end up bigger. They end up with a higher amount of body fat and some muscle loss too. So that's why you have to take your goals into consideration. If the goal is the marathon, then set the fat loss goals aside. That's okay. Like, it's all good. It's not like it's something that, you know, you have to say like, well, I want to do both, so I'm just going to run this marathon, increase my training, and lose fat. Don't go into it for that. If weight loss is lost when you're running a marathon, then you have to understand your odds that probably about 20 to 40% of that loss is going to be muscle. So you want to be actually trying to make sure that you don't lose any muscle in that process, which means you may actually gain some fat in the process. And that's okay, because it's just temporary. You're just doing it for the marathon. A little bit of the fat might actually help you with fuel while you're out there. So it's okay. Like, just remember what you're in it for. Focus on that, and then switch when you're done, you know, then maybe go into a phase where you try to rebuild some of the muscle. That's okay. So I see Jessica said that, like, I've never lost fat while training for a half marathon. Kelly said the same thing. Like, when you do it, you're just in it to be in it. You're not doing it for the sake of losing any fat. So if you diet without running, you know, you may lose some muscle. If you diet with running, you may lose a little bit less if you're eating properly. But if you're dieting with resistance training, then you probably won't lose any muscle. Like, if you're fueling properly, the percentage of muscle loss decreases so rapidly just from adding that resistance training in. So, you know, even if you're a newbie. So that's why it's really important that even a marathon runner would need to also lift and eat in order to lose the fat. And even then, like I said, it would just be a byproduct of some of the other stuff of the increase in muscle mass, if they even get any. So just want to like kind of explain how that all comes together. I know a lot of times, because we see so many thin runners and maybe not so thin lifters, that we're like, well, how do you explain that? Because they're obviously getting smaller and they're running, and look at all those people that are lifting, they're not necessarily, you know, losing a bunch of fat, or maybe they're not really skinny. But it's just important to know that, like, some people are running because they're lean. They're not lean because they're running, you know, like a lot of times our body types lend us to a certain type of activity. So if a person is already lean and they start running or doing yoga or whatever, then a lot of times we just want to draw a conclusion that that thing did that to them. Or if maybe it's the first time that somebody ever did it, they went from doing nothing and they start running, suddenly they lose, you know. Or people that are more on the like endomorph, mesomorph side tend to lift, because it's just like somebody like me. Like I'm more of a like short, stocky type person. I'm just not really built for running. So if I was to assume that I would just run and get lean, that's not necessarily the case. Whereas if there's somebody else who's, you know, 5'11" and already pretty thin, and they start running, they're already lean. So people tend to gravitate towards what comes easier to them or is more enjoyable. Some people will do it just for the challenge of it. Maybe they're like, I've never been a runner and I want to become a runner. So they'll push past that despite their physique, despite their body type, or, you know, whether or not it's easier. So it just depends. But a lot of times that is the case. So certain body types start to do certain workouts based on preference, you know, often like in like childhood sports or whatever. And then those that aren't that body type, you know, start just associating it with that. Like, oh, then that must be the way to get skinny, is by running. So it's just important that we don't like become addicted to something, or thinking that like we have to force ourselves to do something else in order to get results. Sometimes, you know, somebody who's bigger may decide to run and then not like it because it hurts, and then they pick something else that doesn't hurt as much, you know, or they find something that they are good at, you know, and so they keep that up. Or somebody else may be miserable doing it but push through it because they think that that's the key to getting skinny, and then, you know, they end up looking a little bit smaller because that was their preferred choice of workouts and they were super, super new. But if you're not super, super new, those things aren't going to apply to you anymore. So it's really it's good to know that if you do want to run, then either way, you just need to be in shape before running, instead of thinking of running to get into shape. You just want to know that diet still always matters, you know, as far as like what you're eating, not going on a diet. What you're eating still matters. So if you're going to run a marathon, fuel for your marathon, take it seriously, do your training, you know, try to keep lifting throughout if you can, just so that you can lessen the muscle mass that you're losing, or maybe lose none at all. I see Aichel posted, like, there's so many runners that are eat more to weigh less. So it's not like you can't, like, oh, I run marathons, so I'm not even worried. It's not like you have to choose. It's just about knowledge. It's about understanding that, doing at least some of what you love still matters as far as consistency and sustainability. But doing things that maybe you don't necessarily like may be needed as far as for reaching your goals. So it's super important that you know what your goals are going into it. You know what your lifestyle factors are. You know what workouts make you happy. And you figure out a way to make that all work based on what it is that you like to do. So if you love cardio, do it. If you're naturally inclined to do it, like you're good at it, then keep doing it. That's okay. If you're already doing it though, and you're not getting the results that you want, then you may want to cut back some. It doesn't need to be all, but if you're not looking to increase your endurance, then, or you're not trying to train for a cardio-based goal and you don't like cardio, then don't do it. It's really like it's up to you type thing, but just make sure that you're taking into account your lifestyle, your preferences, and your goals. So, all that being said, if you love cardio, you don't want to give it up, how much, can you do for fat loss? Some suggestions, again, nothing set in stone here, do what you want, but some suggestions is that if you're gonna do the longer sessions, say you're training for a marathon and you're like, I need to do some long sessions and I still want fat loss, I would say probably consider just consider one or the other. If you're not training for something, but you're like, I just still like getting in like a 60-minute run, a couple times a week, then I would say try to keep it to 2 to 3, like of those longer sessions. Like doing more than 3 super long sessions each week is probably going to start counteracting your goals if fat loss and muscle building or muscle maintenance are in your goals. Those are the longer sessions. Again, don't take any of this as like I'm saying don't do cardio. I'm just saying if you're into the super long sessions or DVDs, whatever it is, you're like, I just like popping in my DVD and doing it for 90 minutes. Try to keep it, less than 3 times a week, maybe 2 times a week, something like that, and then match your longer sessions with heavy lift sessions. So if you're going to do a 90-minute run, then you may want to start thinking on terms of like, okay, I need to probably figure out how to get in another 90 minutes of lifting during this time or something like that. Like it doesn't have to be exact, but it just means like, don't think like, okay, well you said I can run 3 times a week, so I'm going to run 3 times a week and I'll lift, now and then when I feel like it and I'm going to lose fat. No, think in terms of kind of matching, match those longer sessions. If you're going to throw them in, then add in some lift sessions too. So making sure that you're doing that. So if you want to go pound the pavement 2 times a week for an hour, then maybe you should consider lifting probably more than 2 hours that week as well too. So like on your non-cardio days, don't do them all. Don't like go like 2 a days on me. I'm not saying that that's what you have to do. I'm just saying like if you're going to go, that Wednesday, I'm going to go run for an hour, then Monday or Tuesday, maybe you should be looking into get in a lift for an hour or 30 minutes Monday, 30 minutes Tuesday. Like try to match those times so that the scales don't start tilting so much in the direction of cardio that you're wondering, I don't understand why I'm not reaching my goals, because you have to balance that out a little bit. So make sure if you're adding on one side that you're thinking about what's happening on the other side, because as you start adding, that's what's happening to your scales is they are being tilted literally and probably figuratively as well. So when I'm saying lifting, now that doesn't mean I'm going to go for a 90-minute run on Monday and then I'm going to do a body pump class on Tuesday. Body pump is also going to be considered cardio. That's MRT. Remember we talked about that at the beginning, metabolic resistance training. So those sessions don't balance out the cardio. So that's why you have to actually start thinking it through now and thinking like, okay, if I'm adding in that run, that maybe swapping, like if you traditionally like doing like 60-minute classes a couple times a week and you decided you want to start training for a marathon, then perhaps you want to start thinking it through like that. Like, okay, I'm going to swap my boot camp class for my run, or I'm going to swap, my body pump class or whatever for that run, then it's an even trade-off. But a cardio-based lifting does not balance out a cardio session. Again, they're different types, they do different things. One may be a little bit better for fat loss than the other, but if you're saying that that's what you want, that's what you need, that's what makes you feel good, that's what you need to train for or whatever, then those are just the things that you want to think about during that phase. When you're in another phase, you may not do it at all. You may say, you know, okay, I'm going to scrap the long runs during this phase and I'm just going to move to shorter like HIIT sessions so that I still keep up my endurance for the most part, so that I'm not like starting from scratch when I start back training for my next, you know, 5K, 10K. But I want to focus a little bit more on my fat loss, so I'm not going to do as many of the long sessions. So that's just, again, you know, just something to think about. So if you love it and you're not going to give it up, then you want to think, okay, how can I, you know, match some of those sessions, and how can I try to keep my longer sessions to no more than 2 to 3 times a week. You can probably keep up most of your endurance levels with that 2 to 3 times a week. If you don't want to follow that, then that's fine. That's up to you. Just, again, remember, now you're going to probably move away from the fat loss zone, and you just got to be okay with that. It's not a bad thing. It just means that's just not your focus for now, and it's okay to not be trying to focus on 3 zillion things. So, during the day you say, what about training for a 5K, 10K, nothing like a marathon? Again, I would kind of say the same thing. Like, if you're training for a shorter race, like, really, if you're not training for a marathon, whether or not you truly need the longer runs in there is up to you. A lot of people don't. A lot of people can train for them with maybe 1 long run a week and doing a couple of HIIT sessions just to make sure that, you know, they're staying in top shape, because your HIIT workouts will transfer over into your longer runs. Even though it seems like they're opposite, they will still transfer over, and then maybe you don't have to start adding in the longer runs until you're a little bit closer to that event. For some of the 5Ks, you may find out that you never even need to add in a super long run, period. If you learn how to, but if you're just trying to practice pacing yourself and you want it, then, you know, that's okay. So it's just important to understand the differences. And then again, remembering that there's different types of cardio as far as like what types are best for what. For like your mood enhancing, you know, that may be your longer duration cardio. Like if you feel like that the longer runs help with your depression, those endorphins just like make you feel better, you know, then that may be something that you don't want to completely cut out of your life for the sake of fat loss, because the stress that you're going to feel, you know, and the depression that you're going to be under will just make the lifting workouts and everything else that you're doing feel so miserable that it won't even matter. So if it's something that does, you know, as far as for mood enhancing, that's probably going to be your longer workouts. For cortisol reduction, for like relieving stress and, you know, that stress belly, that's going to be your leisure walks and your slow pace yoga. Not power walks, not power yoga, not hot yoga, not, you know, anything crazy. Just leisure walking. That is going to help actually bring your cortisol levels down. If you are under lots and lots of stress, like we talked about in the beginning, you're going to want to bring those cortisol levels down first. I know some of you guys were on the coaching call that we did a couple of weeks ago, where we really, really dug into this in the academy. But that stress has to be conquered first. If you're under a ton of stress and you add more stress, I'm going to 100% guarantee you that you're not going to reach your goals unless your goal was to stress more. Like, you're not going to reach a fat loss goal. You're not going to necessarily reach a muscle building goal or muscle maintenance goal, because your body is just worried about the stress. It thinks that you're about to shut down, and everything that's happening is concerning that shutdown. Your digestion is like all off, your sleep is off, you're probably gaining fat, you know, like there's so much that's going to be happening when you're under stress, that if you're under stress, like just stop there. Don't even attempt any other goals. Your goal becomes reduce stress. So your yoga, lifting, that kind of stuff is going to be good for cortisol reduction. I mean, yoga and walking are going to be good for cortisol release and reduction. Your mood is going to be helped by your like steady state stuff, you know. And for like fat loss, muscle retention, that's when you're going to want to stick with more shorter duration, high intensity stuff, or the metabolic resistance training. So the cardio with weights, the lift weights faster, the boot camps, the, you know, Tabatas, things like that, those are going to be a little bit better for your fat loss and muscle retention. But again, all of them you want to kind of play into the overall scheme of things. Like when you're adding those in, also figure in where you're going to add your lifting. And never forget that nutrition comes first in the hierarchy. If you've never seen that video or read that blog post before, then I highly recommend taking a look at the fat loss hierarchy, where we talk about, nutrition is at the top twice, and then you move into lifting, and then HIIT, and then steady state cardio as far as your fat loss goes. Again, if your goal is not fat loss, take a lot of what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because a lot of what I'm talking about is based on fat loss goals, and make it work for you. Make sure that you're understanding what your lifestyle is, how stressed out you are, how you feel about cardio, like how much cardio do you actually want. If you like it, then you're taking into consideration, okay, what types, and if they're going to be longer duration, how do I balance them out with HIIT? If you don't like cardio at all, then don't do it. You can find other ways to do it. You can do some of the more MRT based stuff, or you can do the shorter workouts, Tabata and stuff like that. So I hope that kind of helped you guys to see how, as always, I put the ball back in your court, because the diet mentality wants us to pick a side, wants us to think like, okay, good or bad, black or white, like, how much do I do or not? Like, it's really always going to be up to you, and it's going to be really important that you take the time to look at all of the factors involved before you make your decision. You don't just jump in because, you look on Instagram and here's the newest craze and everybody's doing this new workout DVD series, or, everybody's promoting HIIT, so more is better. I'm going to do HIIT 4 times a week and not lift. Or, there's a new marathon and I love getting those medals, so I'm just going to train for marathons all year long and hope that I look ripped by the end. Like, it's really important that you take that into consideration, figure out what your goals are, figure out the types that you want, understand how different workouts affect you, whether it's your mood, your cortisol, or your fat loss or muscle retention goals, and then focus on what you're eating to make sure that those goals are fueled, and then figure out when and where you're adding in the cardio. So
okay, hopefully that helped answer some of your questions that you had about cardio. If your questions were not answered, go ahead and drop them below. I don't mind doing an entirely new video in order to discuss this with you if you still feel like you need some help. If you're somebody who wants to be a part of our app so that you can be part of conversations like this all the time and join our monthly Q&A sessions where I am helping you on the spot reach your goals, go ahead and join us today. I'll post a link in the comments below and probably up here somewhere so that you can be a part of that monthly periodization that I have built out for you to help you to rebuild that lost muscle mass, heal your metabolism, and finally lose the fat. So that's it for this week. I'll see you guys next Thursday.